good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We have something really important to talk about today. What we have to talk about today is the future of the exhibition business, literally. There is so much going on in terms of technology and in terms of a host of other things that will affect what we do in the future. But in my opinion, one of the most important things that is going to affect us is happening right now at this particular moment. And it is a huge change in the people who actually attend our exhibitions. So what I'd like to do with you over the next short while is to go through and talk to you about what that shift means to us, and then to give you some suggestions on how we're going to cope with that. What are we going to do with that? How can we thrive if the very people that we are producing our exhibitions for are new people? What do they expect? What are they looking for? Are they any different? So what we're going to do is we're going to follow along with my presentation, and you're going to have to advance the slides as they come along. They're all marked, they're all numbered. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see the number. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, as I am ready, I will say, please advance to the next slide, and I will give you the slide number just to make sure you're following along with me. Now, let's just go to the first slide and just try this out. First slide is the agenda. Now, what I'd like to cover with you in our short time together is, first of all, tell you who are these various generations that we are going to meet. Do we have a definition of them? Can we understand them better? And that's the very, very first step in coping, is to understand who they are. And therefore, we're going to be in a much stronger position to understand what to do next, which is to see how they impact us. And then what I want to do is I'd like to start the process of having you begin a series of questions. Now, how we're going to solve the issue of how we become relevant to the different generations is going to be very unique to each and every one of you. And how I believe you're going to be able to cope with this and to thrive through this tsunami of people that we're seeing over the next short while is by asking yourself some very, very key questions. And those key questions are going to lead you to knowing and understanding what you can do in your exhibition in order to make the changes that will be relevant to the people who will be coming. And those people are both visitors and exhibitors. Both of them are changing dramatically. So what I'd like you to do is to follow along with me, and we'll go through this one at a time, and I will then, oops, there we go. So we're going on to the next one. So then it will go along together, and then what I hope to do is to then go through some basics with you to get you to understand who these people are. And then I'm going to give you some questions, and those questions I hope will begin the process for you, the process of questioning. So what I'd like you to do is follow along with me, take notes, whatever comes out of this that's important for you, please write it down. My goal today is to encourage you to ask the questions that will uncover new ideas and give you the edge you need to thrive as the dynamics of your visitors change. So let's go through this together. So we're going to go on to slide number 2. And the first question that I'd like to answer for you is, who are these generations? Now, the Center for Exhibition Industry Research, that's CEIR, the American-based association, which is part of IAEE, a few years ago came up with a landmark bit of research. It was just absolutely amazing. And I remember reading it a few years ago. And not only was I impressed with its fullness, and in depth, but also in terms of timing. So a few years ago, they said by 2015, that's right now, what we would be looking for on the floor of every exhibition that we run is 5 different generational groups. Now, what was really interesting about that was this has never happened before, ever in history. The 5 groups are, and if you start from your left and go through your right, you can see very clearly. What they call the traditionalists, which is those born prior to 1946. The baby boomers, who are 46 to 64, were a huge generation. These are people who were born immediately after the Second World War. It was a very, very large cohort. And what the boomers did, because of their virtue of size, they literally drove the economy for the last 30 or 40 years. Their children born between 1965 and 1981 are the Gen X's. Then from 1982 to 1997, we have the Gen Ys. And then after 1997, we have the last generation, who are just now approaching the position where they are being introduced into our industry. You will read lots about the various generations as you read industry articles, as you read our blog, as you read a whole bunch of different things. Some people will call the generations by different names, like Gen Y sometimes is referred to as Gen C, or sometimes millennials, or there may be a whole raft of different names. They may even define the birth dates a little bit differently and maybe be off by a year or two back and forth. But what I'll say to you is don't worry about that. It's the trends that we're looking at. So the very specific labels for a particular generation, or the very specific birth dates for a generation, don't worry about it, because the trends are going to be exactly the same. So go to, if you will, please, go to slide number 5. The change in numbers, which is right now today. Gen Y, the 18 to 34-year-olds, now number it. Now this is North America. I don't have worldwide numbers yet, but again, remember, it's trends. So the Gen Ys, the age 18 to 34, now in North America, number 75.3 million. The boomers, their grandparents, remember, born before 1946 and 1964, now number 74.9 million. Not a huge difference between the baby boomers and their grandchildren in terms of size. This Gen Y millennial generation is huge and will have on the industry and on the world just as much impact as the boomers did previously. Gen X's, boomers' children, the 35 to 50-year-olds, will peak by 2018, and they will outnumber boomers by 2028. But the Gen X, and the only reason they're going to outnumber boomers is that the number of boomers is actually shrinking rather than growing. And what's really interesting is the Gen X generation is sandwiched between two very large cohorts. So the people we're seeing now attending our exhibitions, whether as an exhibitor or as a visitor, are not going to have the same kind of impact that the boomers did previously and the Gen Ys will in the future. They're sort of sandwiched in between. So we do have to cater to them. We have to understand that they're different than both the older and younger generations. We have to understand how different they are in order to be able to be what they want us to be. And at the same time, we still have to understand that the Gen Ys are coming on now in huge numbers, and we have to be something for them as well. Now, are you getting the vastness of what we're trying to deal with here? This huge wave of people that we have to cater to because of the virtue of change. It means that everything in our industry changes. We can't be the same as we were yesterday, tomorrow, because it's just simply not going to work. So this is just, if you turn to slide number 5, you can just get an idea of how it's changing. And this slide goes up to, if you can see on the left-hand side, up to 2020. And that blue line, you can see it's just growing. The red line, which is Gen X's, you see it's pretty much staying the same. That's not going to grow, but it's not going to shrink for the next while. And what is shrinking is the yellow line. That's the boomers. And the boomers are shrinking in pure numbers relative to the Gen X's and the Gen Ys. And why I show you that is when I go to an exhibition, and I've been participating in exhibitions for the last 30 years, my whole career, and I'm clearly a baby boomer. What I see when I walk the exhibition floor is exhibitors coming out and approaching me, talking to me as if I was a boomer. Clearly, I'm a boomer. I have very specific things that I like. I have very specific preferences. But I asked the question, if a Gen X or a Gen Y approached these people, would they treat them the same? And my answer is they probably would, because they're ill-prepared to understand that the Gen X's and Gen Y's are different. And the numbers here just tell you that that difference is going to be magnified over the next 5 or 10 years. So if you will please turn to the, let me just give you some background into who these people are. So we're on slide number 7. The boomers, born between 46 and 64, these are people who, as I said before, were hugely powerful in terms of numbers. They were people who were career driven. Now remember, these people went through, they are children of parents who went through very, very big traumatic events. One was World War II. The other one was the Great Depression. Both of their parents went through that, and both parents instilled on the boomers a very, very strong set of goals and values. And these values were, the most important thing you can do is to provide for your family. How do you provide for your family? You have a good, solid career. They developed a loyalty to large corporations, a loyalty to brands, a loyalty to employers. It was nothing for my generation, and for many of you who are listening to us today, it was nothing for us to join a very large corporation and actually lay out a career path with that organization. Why? Because that was what we were taught. We were taught that loyalty was there. We loved meetings. We loved having dialogues. Our desire was to leave a legacy to our children and our grandchildren, and we were a highly competitive group of people. Now, this is just sort of a big, broad generalization of who the boomers are, but it's a really good beginning point for us to understand what we're dealing with here. Please turn to slide number 8. The Gen X's. Remember, these are the baby boomers' children. How are they different? And the answer is, you bet they are. They don't just trust big corporations. They don't trust big business. They don't trust industries. That trust has to be earned. The Gen X's is very self-focused. They're very self-reliant. They are very individualistic. They are very independent. But the big one for Gen X is they're skeptical. Now, why are they skeptical? The answer is probably because their parents were taught to put all of their faith into a system which over the last 30 or 40 years has somewhat broken down in their eyes. Now, all of this is coming from the SEER research, and I think what it's giving us is a really good understanding of who these various generations are. Now, if you go down to the next slide, let's look at this last one, which is kind of interesting. This is Gen Y. This is the young folks. Now, let me tell you about them. They're optimistic, okay? Unlike their skeptical parents, these folks are really optimistic. One of the interesting things about a Gen Y is they really want money. They want to be rich. They live online. This is a totally computerized generation. They love their parents. They love their elders. Again, not with skepticism, but with pure love and devotion. They dream big. They're idealistic. They are energized. They are altruistic. It's the Gen Ys who are going to change the planet. Now, does this sound familiar at all? It should, because the Gen Y, in many cases, is the mirror image of the baby boomer. They are so different than Gen X's, their parents, but they are very similar to their parents, who were born in a time when the world was just sort of coming to some kind of rationality. They were optimistic about the future. Yes, they wanted to leave a legacy. Remember, they did have big dreams about where they were going. They were idealistic. They were energized. The Gen Ys are very, very similar. And that's kind of interesting. So let's take a look at some other interesting Gen Y differences. And this is kind of interesting because if you understand who these generations are, what it means to you is that you understand better how to communicate with these people. For example, when you take a look at Gen Ys and you talk about social media, which is one of the huge differences between Gen Ys and X's and Boomers, because Boomers didn't even have social media. I mean, Boomers didn't have computers, you know, in the early years of being a Boomer. But take a look at them. They are online. They post to, you know, nearly 60% of them post 1 to 3 times a day to social media. So these are folks who are totally living within a community in the moment. Not, we're going to send you a message and you'll respond to me tomorrow. Online means they send the message now and they get a response instantly. For them to have to wait for an answer, for them to have to wait for information, is a lifetime to them. So what do they talk about? You know, if they're online so much, what do they talk about? So the question here is, this is interesting. If you had a positive experience at an exhibition, would you be more or less likely to communicate with a company using social media? If you had a positive experience at an exhibition, you walked up and you were chatting with an organization, would you be more or less likely to use their social media sites? And this is really interesting. So they meet face to face. They actually engage with your exhibitors face to face. And if they like that face-to-face interaction, what they demand from them, this is Gen Y, is an online presence. Isn't that interesting? There's more. There's much, much more. Let me go on to the next one. So Gen X and Gen Ys and exhibitions, they're very, very similar. Very, very similar. So 5 reasons consumers choose to engage with a brand at an event. See, now we're talking about events. I don't want to talk more about just generalities of who these people are. I want to talk about how they are affected by their presence at an event. So if they go up and they talk to people, that's a visitor talking to an exhibitor, and they engage with that exhibitor, okay? Why do they engage? And this one was so interesting to me when I saw it, and you'll see why in a minute. You going from left to right, they engage because they're happy with the location, so they're happy with the location of the exhibition, but also where that exhibitor is located within the exhibition. They're interested in the product demonstration. They're visually engaged with the actual display and the stand. There is some kind of connection with the brand and the product. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And the one that absolutely shocked me is the last one. The giveaways. Do you find that interesting? I do, because, you know, as somebody who has been, myself, who have been helping exhibitors for an awful long time and helping them engage more with their public, one of the things I told them to do was don't just have a whole bunch of giveaways out on your table, because all you're going to do is attract people who are going to come and just take them. But yet, the Gen Y say, that's the reason for engagement. So maybe I was wrong. I'm not sure. Would Gen X or Gen Y be more or less likely to buy a product as a result of a good experience with that company at an event? And this was interesting, because what we found was that the answer was overwhelmingly yes. 94% were actually more likely to make a purchase than not if they had met somebody that they liked at an exhibition. So you see, when we talk about our exhibitions as being face-to-face marketing, which they are, it doesn't stop there. It only starts there. The question is, if an exhibitor did his job well and engaged visually, engaged with giveaways, engaged with a good product and a good product demonstration, the likelihood of somebody doing business with them later is greatly enhanced. This is something that you ought to be passing along to your exhibitors, to let them know some of this stuff that we're talking about today. Their preference. This is interesting. Will they buy at the exhibitions? And I know a lot of industrial exhibitions are not about selling, they're about generating contacts. That's true. But when there is the opportunity for a Gen X or a Gen Y to buy, the answer is 22% will buy on site, 30% will buy online. And that number was amazing to me. It wasn't, this is a relatively current survey, so only a third of them will buy online, but the balance will buy face-to-face. They actually want to meet this vendor again. They want to go to their store. They want to go to their showroom. They want to have a salesperson make a call to them, and that's how they'll buy. After an event, how quickly would Gen X and Gen Y buy? Okay, they're turned on. They want to do business with people who have an online presence. They want to do business with people who have engaged them properly at the exhibition. And the answer here is that the majority of the people will buy, and remember this is on average because there are certainly many products that have sales cycles which are very long. There are many products and services that have sales cycles which are relatively short. But on average, 44.7% would buy within a week. 26.6% will buy within a month. Isn't that amazing? If you can turn these people on, if you can get their attention properly, they will then do business quicker with the exhibitors who they are meeting at the event, at the show. That's so interesting because we seem to have lost ourselves in many cases. You have many exhibitors who do not have an aggressive follow-up program. And these exhibitors then will follow up way, way beyond the 1 week when people, the average person is going to actually make a purchase decision, and then they're disappointed with the results. So whose fault is that? And the answer is, it's certainly the exhibitor's fault for following up too late, but I think it's also you, the show organizer's fault, for not helping them understand the dynamics of what they're dealing with. We're now on number 17. There seems to be a reluctance amongst many, many exhibitors. Now, yeah, I know we can divide our exhibitors into two broad categories. We have the very large, sophisticated exhibitor who really knows what they're doing and they really understand exhibitions. But these large exhibitors don't make up the bulk of the exhibition floor. In fact, the bulk of the exhibition floor are made up of small to medium-sized exhibitors, and in many cases, they don't really understand what they're doing. They don't really understand the nuances of an exhibition and exhibition marketing. And in many cases, they are ill-prepared to do one of the big jobs, which is follow-up, because of lack of understanding, of lack of wanting to be that aggressive with the people that they've met at the exhibition. There's a million reasons why they don't. And yet, almost 100% of Gen Ys, if they are engaged properly at the exhibition, welcome a post-show communication of some sort. And there's all kinds of ways that I believe an organizer can help their exhibitors do just that. Oh, this is kind of interesting to me. So how does Gen Y want to be communicated with? If they will welcome some communication, what's the best way to do it? And if you take a look at the bottom one, which is the least important one, or the second least important one, is social media. They want something further than that. They want to continue this face-to-face marketing thing that they've already had. So emails are still really important to these people. Invites to a webinar, just as you're attending today, special promotions, invitations to future events, but social media and text are the lowest on the totem pole. And when I read that, I was so interested in that particular number because I just assumed that things like email were lessening in importance and things like social media and text were growing in importance. But we have to be very careful not to make those assumptions. We have to look at the research, which is what this is all about today. Now, let's just take a look at the three generations, Boomers, Gen X's, and Gen Ys. And you can have access to this, all these slides that I'm showing you now, and you can see and this webinar will be archived in the Education Center, so you can go back through it again. But what's very interesting to me when we're trying to understand who these people are and how they fit into a corporation, they're very, very interesting looking at the different perceptions they have. For example, take a look at the red line. The most important thing about the red, which is Gen X's, is they are perceived as being a productive part of the organization. Gen X is now the driver of the organization. The blue, okay, which is the dark blue, which is the Gen Y, these people are concerned primarily on an individual basis, but the interesting thing about them is that's where the enthusiasm is coming from. The light blue, which is the boomers, these are people who are viewed as being hardworking. Now there's more. I mean, I'm going to go through 20 characteristics with you, and I'm certainly not going to go through all of them, but I just wanted to point that out, that what you've got are people who are hardworking. That's their baby boomer parents or grandparents. But hardworking isn't enough. Who's driving the corporations today? It's the Gen X. But where's the enthusiasm coming from? It's the Gen Y. And that enthusiasm is going to get them firmly into the next generation. Let me just show you a few more, because I've only got 1 to 9 here. But let's just take a look at a few more of these characteristics. And just, again, I'm just giving you broad scope of what they are. Just a second, I just went by that. We're going on to slide number 20. So here's just a few more. Here's the last 10 of them. The red, the relationship builders. Remember, the red are Gen X. That's that middle generation. So they're the people who are very likely to build relationships. They are very adaptable to change. The dark blue, or the dark blue, which are the boomers, are they're the executives of the organization. But remember, in the very near future, those numbers are going to decrease rather than increase. And the light blue, these are people who are on social media. These people are really tech savvy. So why does all that matter? Well, it matters for a great deal of reasons. Let me just go down to slide number 21 and just give you sort of a summary, a summary of what all this means to us. So, boomers. Each generation has its own pros and cons. Each generation is somewhat individualistic. And remember, the reason I'm going through this with you is to help you start developing the questions that I think you're going to need in order to make the changes that are going to be appropriate so that your exhibition and your organization can thrive as we are adjusting to these new generations that are affecting us. So the boomers, pros, they're productive, they're hardworking, they're the essential for the development of others. Isn't that interesting? These are people who we look at to help develop the Gen X's and the Gen Y's. These are the people who will help develop the future leaders of our industry. The cons are they are low on adaptability, they're somewhat fixed in their ways, they're low on being collaborative, they're low on social media, and they're not as good brand ambassadors as you will see in a second as Gen Y's are. Gen X's are being perceived as being very, very productive. They're the team player, and they are essential for businesses to grow. Remember, this is how they're being perceived. The downside of a Gen X from a perception point of view is that they are not quite yet at the very senior level of their organizations, and being cost effective to their organization, they're not as high as other folks are. Gen Y's are, of course, tech savvy, they're social media savvy, they're collaborative, they're adaptable, they're entrepreneurial. Remember, that's the group that has this huge level of enthusiasm. They're not necessarily perceived as being the best team players, that's Gen X, but they are hardworking, but not as hardworking as their boomer grandparents. They are a productive part of their organization, but once again, not as great as the Gen X's. So the perception of each of these generations is different. Let's move down to the next slide. If the big difference between Gen X and Gen Y was defined so clearly by an author that I had read once upon a time, and they said, look, if you asked a Gen X to jump, they might jump and ask, was that high enough? Remember, that's who they are. But if you asked a Gen Y, if they would jump, their reaction might be, cool. See the difference? It all comes down to those two slides. They are two very, very different groups of people. Okay, so now let me get into helping you develop some questions, okay? So here are some of the questions that I think are important for you to ask. You see, Gen X, they want to have a purpose. Gen X is, remember, they're the children of boomers who were career driven, but Gen X was growing up in families where the primary interest of that particular family was the career, was the loyalty, which they thought was not valid because they saw that loyalty being taken away from their parents. Parents who worked for the same organizations for years and years and thought they would always be there, now because of buyouts and the economy and a whole bunch of different reasons, these corporations were not there anymore for their parents. So remember, the Gen X's were skeptical. But they were skeptical about a business, but they still wanted to have a purpose. And their purpose in life was their family. Family was hugely, hugely important to Gen X's. They didn't want to put career before family. They wanted to balance it nicely. Gen Y, we have seen, is that group that is very, very passionate about what they do. They're very enthusiastic about what they do. What they have, Gen Ys, are multiple passions. Gen Ys are the altruistic generation of our time. It's Gen Ys who are going to fix all the problems of the world that their parents and their grandparents created. So if we could say Gen X lives to work, we could say Gen Y works to live. Another huge difference. So the question I'm going to pose to you, and I remember I'm just giving you some of these questions to give you ideas of the kinds of questions you should be looking at and asking your team about the future of your exhibition. How does participating in your exhibition provide meaning for Gen X and Gen Y visitors? Does it? Does it? Do you provide meaning beyond just here's a bunch of products, here's a bunch of services, and here's a bunch of educational center sessions? Is there more to your exhibition that will help them? And the answer is yes. I see green initiatives, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. I see people taking on causes that are affected around the world. I see them sharing those ideas and those passions with Gen Ys who are coming to their exhibitions. So ask yourself the question, is your exhibition strictly about a place where buyers and sellers meet? Or is it more than that? Is the experience you're offering Gen X and Gen Y greater than just an opportunity to experience products and services? This is kind of interesting, okay? If you ask Gen Y, and this was a survey done by a company called Deep Focus, if you ask Gen Y where they want to work, these are the top 3 things they mention. Gen Y wants to work at Google first, Apple second, and third for themselves. Not for a big company like the grandparents, not for an organization like their parents who are living to just make sure that everything is taken care of and that they've got a good balance in their life, but they want to go out and work for themselves. They want to be freelancers. They want to be the new masters of the universe. Why? You see, when we take a look at that, this opens up another huge, massive question for us. Both Apple and Google, they're 2 organizations which, of course, everybody knows, but what they want to do is they want to change the world. Yes, they are both hugely successful. They are both very, very profitable organizations. They both have products and services that everybody on this planet uses. But what attracts Apple and Google to the Gen Ys is their mission of wanting to change the world. They don't just create a brand new product, they create a brand new way of doing things. You know, iTunes changed the movie industry. The iPhone changed the portable communications industry, which is now being changed by the iWatch. Google has just taken the world by storm, and yes, they're going out and they're they are taking care of something called the Internet of Everything, where they are looking at products and services not only for themselves to collect this vast amount of data, but for their customers who can now live differently. You know, there's that company called Next, which provides in-home heating. So in your house, you can have a Next box, which you can control the internal climate of your house externally. So you pick up your iPhone, provided by Apple, you go on and you see what the temperature is in your house. You turn the temperature down during the day when you're away from your home. And then if it's chilly out, you can raise the temperature just before you get there, so you walk into a cool, very nice atmosphere. Both brought to you by who? Apple and Google. Apple and Google are corporations that they perceive as being freewheeling. They are corporations who they look at and say, you know what? These people can change. These people don't need a ton of meetings to change. They see something and they can just jump on it very quickly, as opposed to some of the boomer organizations, some of the big, heavy manufacturing corporations, the General Motors, the Boeings of the world, who they say, you know what, that getting one of those organizations to change is like changing direction on an ocean liner. It takes time. It takes savvy to make those changes. But even though Google and Apple are big corporations, and even though they're being careful, and even though they report to shareholders and work with the same metrics that any other corporation does, the perception is they can move quickly. And they do. And of course, a lot of that is that they spend so much time looking at the future rather than now, that they're able to actually be that further ahead. These are organizations that they perceive as being intense. You know, if you ask a Gen Y what it's like to be a programmer or a computer architect or software architect or anything like that, they will talk about the intensity. They will talk about, this isn't a 9-to-5 job. I'll go, and when the job's done, then I finish. And there's nothing in the way of working for 1 or 2 or 3 days in a row without sleep. They look at these organizations that way, and they find that passion, that intensity for work is really appealing to them. They look at these organizations as being highly productive. They are in a constant change of flux, a constant change. They like the fact that they're constantly coming up with new products. They're constantly looking in new directions. This is so appealing to a Gen Y. Now remember, if you're at an exhibition and you're running a boomer-focused organization trying to appeal to a Gen Y, you see the problem here? It just doesn't work. They are intrigued with corporate culture. They take a look at these corporations and they see highly successful, incredibly profitable organizations who are out there changing the world, but it's the culture that matters. Take a look at any of the wonderful books that have been written about various organizations, companies like Zappos, companies like Apple, there's a million examples. And what they all talk about is, what is the culture like in our organization for people to work in? What they need, Gen Ys, is they need tangible proof that working can change their lives and make the world a better place. What can you do to replicate any of these characteristics in your exhibition? That's the question. You see, if we understand what we're dealing with Gen Ys, if we understand what appeals to them, then what this should prompt is a question in our minds of, what can we do in an exhibition to complement what it is that they are looking for? And the answer is, once you start asking the question, then the answer is, you bet. You bet you could do lots of things to replicate any of these characteristics, any of them. Like, for example, what if you could make your exhibition part of a larger community in which the venue is located? You know, we come to your venue, so it's in Frankfurt, or it's in London, or it's in Hong Kong, or wherever it happens to be. We ask Gen X's, Gen Y's, and baby boomers to come on and be part of our exhibition for 2 or 3 days. What if they could come and be part of our exhibition for a little bit longer and be involved with the community? What if they could get involved in projects that are part of their exhibition attendance, such as food banks, Habitat for Humanity, elder care centers? I mean, I'm just, throwing examples out to you, but there are all kinds of things going on in the community that you are running your exhibition that we could allow and participate and focus on to get our attendees involved. So rather than coming to our city for 2 days, maybe they come to our city for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days. Maybe your exhibition takes a very active role in something else in the community that is going out and changing people's perception, changing people's lives, and maybe we could share that experience. The simple solution to this is, which I've seen for years, is they do a fundraising. So here's fundraising to help so-and-so, a cause that's going on in our community or in our industry or something. So we're raising money to help something. Well, you see, Gen Ys, that's not enough for them. Just to take some money and drop it in a box, just to sign a check, just to fill in a credit card form, that's not enough. They want to physically get involved. What if they could? What if you could expand the exhibition experience that would allow them to do that? So when they returned after the exhibition is over with, not only did they have an opportunity to meet vendors, not only did they have an opportunity to attend all the technical sessions and hear the keynote speakers, but what if they also came back going, yeah, I did something. Yeah, I learned about something important that is helping humanity. You could do that. You can do that, but it all starts with asking the right question. Well, so here we're on slide number 27. So we're at the next thing. I just saw this very, very recently, so I just added this to my slide deck last week. 5 things about Gen Xers and Gen Yers. It kind of overlaps a little bit. But what's really interesting about Gen Xers versus their baby boomer parents is, number one, is they're not afraid to say, I don't know. I've been a trainer for an awful long time. And one of the issues that I've noticed amongst a lot of staff who are actually working at a stand is this reluctance to want to say, I don't know. What if a visitor walks up to them and says, do you do such and such? They take on this persona that says, I really need to know the answer. Because if I don't know the answer, I'm not doing my job correctly. Gen Xers, Gen Yers, they don't care about that. They'll say, I don't know, much more easily. So, even when we're training people, we don't have to, when we're talking to Gen Xers and Gen Ys, I don't have to deal with that dreadful, I don't know anymore. They're just there. They just get it. If they don't know it, they know how to find out the answer. They live in the moment. They are right in this moment. And that is so interesting because, of course, they are connected. They are much more in the moment than boomers and some of the older Gen X's are. And the reason is because of technology, because of connectiveness. They can, if they need to find an answer, they go online. They got the answer instantly. If they need to communicate with somebody, they go online. The answer is instantly. They are living in the moment. They are not living in the past. They are not living in the future like their baby boomer grandparents were. They're living right now, and connectiveness has allowed them to do it. They are very forthright, and this is really interesting, is they will disconnect whenever they need to. When the conversation's over, it's over. When they're finished with talking to an exhibitor or an exhibition, they will move on. I remember one of the most difficult skills it was for an exhibitor to learn, I mean the exhibitor staff to learn, was how do we disengage from an attendee at an exhibition? And they would go through all kinds of gyrations in their mind. I don't know how to get into this conversation, so I'll just keep it going longer. As long as I'm talking, I'm doing my job. Nonsense. The Gen Xers and the Gen Ys, they know how to get out of a conversation because they live right now. Their right now need is done. They're looking for their next right now need to take care of. And they live with passion and they live with purpose. So, as we're asking the questions, those are 5 interesting things that we can identify about this generation, which is so different than the boomer generation. So, boomers and Gen X's, you all recognize this as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist in the 50s or 60s. He developed this hierarchy of needs, which has become the cornerstone in all communication learning and training and theory and everything. It's as relevant today as it was then. When you go up the hierarchy, the lowest one is the psychological needs, the physiological needs, which is the need for food and water and sleep. But once that's satisfied, people then automatically move up the hierarchy to safety. Once I've got enough food and water and sleep, then I want to make sure that I'm safe, that my shelter will be, won't be, if there's a flood or if something happens, that I've got that safety, if there's safety around me, if the exhibition hall that I'm going to has safety built into it. Once that's done, the social needs take care of. So I now feel safe in traveling to this particular exhibition. I will have all my meals taken care of. There are okay fire exits and a sprinkler system. Now they need social needs, which are things like networking. But then the last 2, the ones on top, are esteem and self-actualization. And what's really interesting are both boomers and Gen Ys are in there, the self-actualization and esteem. They're very similar in character, the boomers and the Gen Ys. So, the big difference, of course, is technology. But when you're thinking about who your attendees are, your visitors are, just don't differentiate hugely between what we used to do and what we are going to do in the future. Remember the big difference of the Gen X's. So here's another question for you. Okay, remember we're just coming up with questions. So Gen X and Gen Ys are eager to contribute to a positive social change. And one of their interesting things is that they want to be involved very much in social change. They don't want to just let the status quo go. So Gen X's and Gen Ys are much more involved politically. Gen X's and Gen Ys are much more involved in committees and work-related things. Gen X and Gen Y exhibitors, from your perspective, will be much more involved than boomer exhibitors. So, you can look forward to having that, because what they want to do is they want to have a much more significant role in affecting change. So the changes, of course, within their industry, but the changes also within their society, within their homes, their villages, their garden, wherever they happen to be. They also have this huge expectation of flexibility. Now, this is really interesting. They don't expect to go to work every day and do exactly the same thing by rote. They expect something different. Now think about that one for a minute. If their expectation is flexibility in their workplace, do they expect the same thing when they come to an exhibition? Are they okay with just having an exhibition and here's the exhibition schedule and just following that schedule, where the schedule allows nothing for flexibility? If they can't make one, they can't pick it up the next day. If they can't see this particular exhibitor on the first pass, they probably will never see that exhibitor again. If they're a day late, maybe they're going to miss the entire exhibition. And many of you may be saying, well, you know, we've always just scheduled things. That's just the way we have to work. And if you're saying that, my suggestion is that you really ought to be asking the question about, is there something different you could do? Is there something different you could do? Talk about the social change thing. Ernst & Young, the large accounting and management company, they have something called a responsibility fellowship program. And what they do is they go to graduates who they're trying to recruit, and they offer graduates an opportunity to do something positive for the world, to make some positive social change. What they do is, for selected graduates, they offer them 50% of their base salary for a period of 1 year, plus a stipend towards healthcare and travel and that other things, to spend that year going out and helping somebody in the world, or some organization in the world, or some group of people in the world. And at the end of the year, they're expected then to come back and join Ernst & Young. Well, you know, when you take a look at corporations and what a lot of these very progressive corporations are doing, it really begs the question from you, is that a good model for us to work with? I mean, could our industry provide, you know, an opportunity to 1 or 2 or 3, you know, graduates from one of the programs where people will be getting into our industry, to offer them an opportunity so that they can go out there and affect change in the world? And when they've got that, and when they've got that wealth of experience, come on back and be real productive members of our industry. Is that something you as an organization, as an exhibition organizer, could facilitate? The answer is, you bet you could. You bet you could. I mean, you look for sponsorships for all kinds of reasons. Why not for something like this? Just a question, just something you want to think about. They want to stay connected to colleagues. They want to, so to them, yeah, sure, they want to network, but they want to stay connected not only prior to the exhibition, not only after the exhibition, but what they want is they want to stay connected during the exhibition. Can you facilitate that? They want an experience that is unique to them. Their perception of themselves is that they are unique. So what they're looking for is something that's unique to them. Following a schedule by rote isn't unique. It isn't unique to them. This is sort of what I have to do in order to get through the next 3 days at this particular industry exhibition. So the question that I'm posing to you as an example of questions is, can you customize the visitor's experience? Can you customize it? That's an interesting thing. Well, how do we customize it? And again, we've got to take a look at who's doing what. You know, for example, if we were going to allow them connectivity, if we were going to allow them to be connected to colleagues, people that they're meeting at the exhibition, well, how do we do that? Well, one of the ways would be to use their smartphones. Well, who's using smartphones more? And take a look at this chart. The answer is ages 25 to 34 are using smartphones more than ages 65 plus, the boomers who are 55 to 64. You know, the biggest group are the 25 to 34 group. That's who we're talking about. That's the Gen Ys. So one of the ways of creating a program that is offering them that uniqueness is their way of communication. Why? Because we know statistically that this particular group wants this more than another group. If you were focused on ages 35 to 44, that's the Gen Xs, you may not want to just use their smartphones. You might want to find out what appeals to them best in terms of staying connected. Do you see what I'm saying here? Is that making some sense? Here's an interesting one in terms of social media. Who uses social media a lot? Who uses social media a very little bit? And not surprising is that the young group, and this particular chart started at 40, but the younger Gen Xs are using social media way, way more than the 65 to 75-year-old groups are using it. So if I was trying to customize a program where I wanted to allow people social media, if I knew that the demographics of my particular visitors were young Gen Xs, this is what I would focus on. You You start with the question, and then from that question, it leads you to answers. It leads you. But unless you ask the questions in the first place, you're never going to get the answers you need. And there's so many studies done out there. I mean, Sears done some really great work. They've just recently introduced a brand new study. But, you know, just pick up the newspaper. We're lucky. All you have to do is Google generational dynamics, and you'll find about 1 million different pieces of information that will help you answer the question. But the first thing, the place you start, are the questions. So another interesting question is, when we take a look at Gen Ys, what do they find meaningful? What are meaningful work-related rewards for them? And here's an example from, this is from Ernst & Young again. So they want a perfect job for them is high-quality colleagues. They want to meet with peers who they feel are peers. Flexibility in their work. Prospects for advancement, recognition, a steady rate of advancement, and access to new experience and challenges. So if you are focusing on communicating with Gen Ys, if you are focusing on creating a program specific to Gen Ys, then this just tells you a whole bunch about them, a whole bunch. So the question you need to ask yourself is this one. Remember, what I just showed you in the previous slide, these are non-financial things. Yes, job advancement, you know, certainly would have some financial element to it. But overwhelmingly, these are non-financial things. What turns them on are these connections they have with people. So non-financial rewards are more meaningful than financial rewards to Gen Y. So the question you should be asking is, can you find non-financial incentives to enhance their exhibition experience? So I mentioned one was green. And our industry has, you know, many of the UFI Open seminars over the last few years have been focusing on green initiatives, and you know, there's all kinds of great technology that's helping our exhibition halls become greener. But you know what? Gen Ys don't just care about the fact that you're reusing your carpets. They want something much more significant than that. What they want is they want to know that what they're doing is helping them be part of the green change that is happening in the world. So just walking on a different carpet, yeah, that's important. I got that. But what they're looking for is some kind of initiative so that they can move forward with their lives. They can move forward and help the world, help the planet heal itself. We're just kind of running a little bit short in time, so I'm going to have to rush. But I just want to go down to the second one, which is the Time Warner has a really interesting program called Reverse Mentoring. Time Warner is this huge multinational corporation, and what they do is a reverse mentoring program where, and I know many organizers have tried to incorporate mentoring programs in their exhibition program, which is great. But what Time Warner is doing is something really interesting. They're doing it in reverse, where they take tech-savvy Gen Ys and have them mentor baby boomers who are not quite as tech-savvy. Isn't that an interesting? Could you do something like that? You bet you could. You bet you could. Remember, the older Gen X's and the older Gen X's and the boomers are still there, where they haven't disappeared yet. But what we can do is offer them the experience to bring them up-to-date technology. So it's not just older folks mentoring younger folks on how to get ahead in the industry. It's taking a look at each group and saying, what are your strengths and your weaknesses, and how can we use that to kind of help each other? It gives people purpose. It gives people passion. Those are the kinds of things you can implement into your exhibition. Gen X's, 87% of them, and 83% of Gen Y say that the work-life balance matters. They don't just want to work all day. They want to have this very gentle balance between work and family. They want to make sure that everything is taken care of. They are not prepared to jeopardize family for work, unlike their baby boomer grandparents. So the question for you is, can the planning of your exhibition include family time? Now, I'm talking about going beyond the typical accompanying persons program or a golf day, but Could your exhibition plans actually include activities that include the entire family? I don't see any reason why it couldn't. Why can't attending an exhibition be a family thing? Why can't you have meaningful programs for accompanying persons? Give them educational programs to help them do what they do. Chances are they're probably employed. So, if you understand who they are, what their ages are, where they're employed, what the issues they're dealing with are, maybe you could actually have a full-blown program that runs side by side with your exhibition program that's for accompanying persons. Can we get kids involved in the exhibition? And that means more than just walking around. It means, if for young kids, maybe we need childcare. For older kids, we need activities for them. But those activities don't have to just be a playground. They could be activities that we get our exhibitors involved with. And so with their products and services, maybe they can create interactive games and activities for kids to play that also relate to the industries that their parents are a part of. Can the timing be more in line with family needs? So, maybe school holidays or Christmas or summertime or whenever, parents could take their kids and their family away with them. Could you change the timing of your organization? As long as you're asking the questions, you're going to come up with the answers. I've mentioned this a number of times that boomers and Gen X's are similar. Gen X's are moving into senior positions and will be managing a younger generation that is many ways out of step with the values of this younger generation, while also taking care of their boomers who will be living longer. The Gen X's are in the middle, remember? So they don't necessarily get Gen Ys. They are so different than boomers. So can your exhibition help them understand and deal with this situation? Can it help them in terms of culture? That's both regional and corporate culture. Can it help them understand attitudes about, they're sandwiched in the middle and they've really got a very gentle balancing act to do. Can your exhibition help them do that? So what we've got then is I've just given you a half a dozen questions. And what I hope our time together has helped you do is perhaps start this thinking process. I hope I've encouraged you to go on out there and start doing the research, understand who your attendees and exhibitors are in a much more detailed way than ever before possible. Then once you understand who they are, what I hope I've encouraged you to do is start asking the questions. So the very beginning of your questions are, can you, in your exhibition, provide meaning, create an intense, highly productive, and culture-based experience? Can you customize that experience? Can you find non-financial incentives? Can you incorporate families? Can you help Gen X, both the exhibitors and the visitors, deal with these new demographic realities? Those are my few questions for you, and I acknowledge that it is only the beginning of your search for changing the way your exhibition runs. If you want to know how to put on your exhibitions in the future, let your audience tell you what they want and what they need. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer questions during this webinar, but there's my email address, so I do invite you to come on and if you have any other questions, just let me know and I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. I would also like to invite you all to continue this conversation. And the conversation we're having today, we've been having now for almost 5 years at ufilive.org. ufilive.org is our industry, our community's conversation piece where we chat back and forth and we present ideas and we talk about them and we comment on them. So I invite you all to join me to continue this conversation on UP Live. I hope our time together has been helpful for you. I hope that I've opened your thinking to some new ways of looking at our future. And if I have done that, then we will thrive and we will be happy and successful. Thank you so much for being part of our webinar today.